Welcome to Community Forum. Today is August 25th, 2020. I'm Priscilla Almquist-Olsen, your host for Community Forum. And today we have two of the most illustrious members of that community here with us, Connor Reed, the Town of Easton Administrator, and Dottie Fulginiti, Chair of the Select Board. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Priscilla.
Great. So listen, let's. This is meant to be sort of an update for all of us community members who are in quarantine because of COVID-19. So give us a little rundown, Connor, of what you feel currently are the most important items on your agenda.
Sure. So the town has been having to change the way that we do a lot of our normal business in response to COVID. But we never closed. We've continued to provide services remotely for our administrative services. So when you think of folks like the departments in town hall and things like that, over the spring, we rolled out inspections policies so people could continue to get their inspections without restriction, minus the good health practices to keep businesses moving and construction moving. And our public safety and public works folks have been at it around the clock as normal. So we've been in the aftermath of the June town meeting at Stonehill, kind of pivoting on our level and with the select board back to, I hesitate to use the word normal in 2020, but to some semblance of normalcy. You may have seen last week we had a ribbon cutting, a socially distanced, COVID responsible ribbon cutting at the pump station on Foundry Street as we wrapped up substantial completion of the Five Corners sewer. So that's a major milestone that we were able to continue to complete during COVID. It's the largest infrastructure project we've ever done, and is the culmination of years and years and years of planning and almost 2 full years of construction. So that's a major milestone for the community that we're happy to see wrap up. We have other infrastructure work already in the pipeline. The board in August took the next step towards the redesign and reconstruction of Depot Street between 138 and Newell Circle, which will be a huge project and an incredible improvement. That is done through what's called the TIP process, the traffic improvement plan. So the town of Easton basically fronts the design money, but the state and federal government pay for the construction, which is the real big dollar amount. So it's going to be a $10 million project funded by state and federal dollars that will bring improved sidewalks, bike lanes. They'll actually make a real intersection at Center and Depot rather than the kind of terrifying triangle rotary we have around the monument. And that's going to be a huge improvement starting with construction in the spring. So Public Works busy as always. Monday night, the board actually opened a warrant for another town meeting, if you can believe that. So we're going to be getting into the fall town meeting season and working on that. And town meeting in the fall will probably look different than normal special town meetings, again, just because of COVID and because of the kind of volatility of where the economy is. We'll probably be doing a lot of budget amendments in the fall and trying to pick the ball back up on other items that were delayed in the spring. So our normal CPA articles, zoning articles, and other important business to basically get back to. So we have a full plate and are as busy as ever.
Well, you've been very busy, Connor. And I did see that ribbon cutting. It was pretty spectacular. And I listened to all the speeches. Dottie, you were right on, spot on that. Dottie, maybe you'll let us know about what are the next steps for people who live in the Five Corners area.
Well, I think that, the town is really focused on trying to drive new business opportunities there. And I know that Stephanie Danielson, our Director of Planning and Economic Development, has been having conversations with, investors that want to look at that area. So that's going to be ongoing work. COVID has slowed things down a little bit, but I think that there is still a lot of interest and a lot of conversations about, what that area is going to look like, but it's going to take time. Businesses aren't going to sprout up overnight, but as long as those conversations are happening now, I think it's a real positive step forward.
Yes, and so people in the Five Corners area have to make arrangements to hook up to the sewer line if they so desire. Does the town have a list of people who are certified to do that work?
We do. So the technical term is a licensed drain layer. The DPW permits them. So if people go to the town's website and go to Public Works, you can find a list of certified drain layers who are licensed to perform that type of work in the town.
Okay. Have you noticed any applications to date?
We only announced that those people could do so on Thursday, and I, to be honest with you, have not checked with the DPW director in a couple of days since then.
Okay.
I'll go look.
Yeah. All right. And then the 138 area, that is just ripe for commercial development. Have you had anybody? I know, Dottie, you're on the Economic Council, Development Council. Has that council received any inquiries or positive information which indicates that there already are people who want to develop that area lining up?
Well, the Economic Development Council is not really the group that would get that information. It would go to Stephanie Danielson, the planning director. I know that she has had some conversations, but I don't know the specifics on that. The council, unfortunately, with COVID, we hadn't met, when the governor declared the state of emergency. We had asked all our boards and committees that didn't have a legal responsibility to just kind of hold off a little bit, because we didn't have the staff and the technology set up to be able to have all the boards and committees jump on Zoom right away. So we've only had a couple of meetings during that period of time, and we're focused on looking at ways that we can bring opportunities in to support businesses to help them recover from COVID, and also to develop some sustainability and resiliency in their plans moving forward. So it's always a work in progress there. Mark Lamb is now the new chair of the Economic Development Council, so very excited to have him bring his ideas and different perspective forward, and we're going to have a pretty robust plan moving forward in this year.
Sounds great.
If I could add to that, so specifically there has been some work in that area. There was a nice rebuild of I believe a dentist's office tying into the sewer. There's a new cabinetry showroom and warehouse. I'll be honest, I don't know how that kind of business model works in COVID times for showrooms and things like that, but that was some renovation work that occurred right on 138 as well. And the planning board, I believe last summer, issued a special permit for right outside the district for a mixed use redevelopment of Korea's Plaza that would take advantage of that sewer. To Dottie's point, COVID has complicated things. Frankly, I think that the older school and more traditional view of development, it remains to be seen how that's going to fit in the post-COVID world. When people think about infrastructure projects and they think about growth, they typically many times will say, well, we don't, maybe we don't want to see housing. We want business. And some of the most in-demand businesses are, service-based. The United States economy is driven by the service economy, restaurants and retail. And obviously, retail is I don't want to use the phrase dying, but brick and mortar retail has been on the decline for years and years and years with the advent of online shopping. And it's really taking a huge hit in the time of COVID. Restaurants obviously have been tragically impacted by coronavirus. And so the sectors of the economy that typically take advantage of these things more quickly are some of the most heavily impacted by COVID. So when folks think about, an infrastructure project's done, we should see a new retail shop any day now, I would tamper people's expectations on that, not as a reflection of something deficient with the infrastructure job itself, but just a market reality that the likelihood investors are going to want to sink significant money into an in-person service model right now. I would imagine it gives them significantly more pause compared to the pre-COVID or post-vaccine world when we hopefully get there soon.
Yes, let's hope, because I think most of the Easton residents are counting on the tax relief that commercial business can bring. So tell me, what sorts of challenges does the DPW have now that they've finished oversight on the Five Corners project?
Just challenges in what regard? Like projects they're working on, or just general?
Yes.
So their big ticket project next year will be the Depot Street.
Yes, I know. Besides that, are there any other?
Yeah, I mean, for Public Works, they're very busy right now. Buildings and Grounds are working hand in hand with Easton Public Schools on, the necessary spatial analysis and kind of redesigning pedestrian flow for inside of school buildings in anticipation of the hybrid reopening, working on HVAC systems and things like that around the clock. So they're very busy with that. And just in general, it's it's paving season. It's so Public Works has that going on as well with their normal grounds maintenance.
Okay, and Dottie, maybe you can talk a little bit about school openings and the options and so forth, and where we're at in that regard.
Well, I think the school committee has been meeting pretty regularly and really struggling with the best way to approach the new opening season with the schools. It looks like there's going to be a hybrid approach with cohorts that are groups of students that are going to school 2 days partially in the mornings and then working remotely from their homes in the afternoons. And those cohorts are split up during the week. Honestly, I haven't really followed it up to the minute specifically, but that was the last that I knew of it. I do know that the administration and the school committee are working extremely hard to make sure that they're trying to do the best they can for all the students. And it's a real challenge because this information changes by the minute, and to try to plan and then find out new information or data, they have to twist and turn a lot as they're doing this. So I give them all a lot of credit for the studying, the research, following the data, and trying to make decisions based on that. But I think everybody, including the town side, trying to support the schools in their successful reopening, and really trying to be creative in supporting the families is the best that everyone's doing right now.
Yeah, I know that especially in light of the fact that so many schools which have already started have shut down within days because of outbreaks. The school committee hopefully will be flexible enough to consider that. I'm sure their decision is always open to change, isn't it?
Well, so I just want to put a couple of plugs in here, Priscilla, for anyone who's watching this at home, to make clear that, my position in the select board, we're not actually responsible for schools, right? The school committee and the superintendent are. And I encourage folks that the schools have a super detailed, well thought out reopening plan on the front page of their website that I really encourage everyone to look at, whether you have kids in the schools or not, if you're curious. And that's easton.k12.ma.us. So I just wanted to get that plug out of the way. But then as far as the question of flexibility, Dottie just mentioned that the schools have had to be very nimble in this, because, and this I think sometimes comes as a surprise to folks, frequently myself or the superintendent, we learn about new guidance or expectation from the Commonwealth, from the governor, when it's on TV. It is not typically a process where we have weeks of time to prepare our response to expectations before the public learns what those expectations are. And that's not a criticism necessarily of the governor. The governor himself has an incredible task at hand of trying to pivot and respond to what's going on in the Commonwealth and nationally. Um, I can, and I don't think Dottie can really speak to what the schools can and should do, but what I can speak to is my experience working with them and working with Dr. Cabral in the spring. And as far as being flexible or nimble, I would remind people that Easton took the lead in closing schools and public buildings before the governor and before the state. And that was not a decision that Dr. Cabral made lightly, nor myself. It was very surreal having those conversations the week of March 9th. The governor declared a state of emergency on Tuesday, the 10th. And we all worked pretty much 24 hours a day through that week trying to figure out the appropriate response. And before we had a single confirmed case in Easton, the superintendent made, I think, the right decision to close schools at that time for 1 week, because that's where everyone was with this in the United States. But I think the superintendent of the schools have been proactive on this and have demonstrated that they are doing the best with a nearly impossible set of circumstances to try to balance obviously the safety of students and staff, but also the realities of the struggles and challenges that remote learning present for students and for working families. So I have confidence
Yes.
in the superintendent and the school committee to do the best that they can for the district and the students and families and staff based on the resources and information available, because that's what I think they did in the spring.
Yeah, thank you. Dottie, I know that you're always researching for grants and opportunities to add to the coffers of the Easton revenue stream. So tell me, has it been very difficult because of COVID and all the expenses with COVID? Has money dried up?
Well, Connor would have more specifics on this, but there is money from the CARES Fund that it has to be used specifically for COVID impacts. So we can use that for some of the supplies and things like that. We have submitted some reimbursement for that, but there's always grants available that we look at. The DPW has just applied for a grant for PFAS, for water issues. There's always infrastructure grants that we're applying for and looking at. And then there's some federal grants related to infrastructure for economic development during COVID. So we're aware of them. Sometimes there's too many grants available to do the work that you need to be able to do in that period of time. So we're very careful about which ones we do apply for. We have a very high success rate when we apply for them. But we want to make sure that we have the bandwidth to be able to fulfill the requirements of any of those grants as well. So it's an ongoing process. And I think that one of the things that I like the most is that our department heads, we don't have a grant writer in Easton, so our department heads are responsible to do that. And they've always been very open-minded and very eager to seek out grants that will help us specifically.
Yeah, well, I know that's the case. Go ahead, Connor.
Sure. If I could add to that with some specificity, we, Easton, I think in a lot of ways, but in grants in particular, we punch above our weight by the fact that, as Dottie said, we don't have a grant writer, period, on staff. We have very lean departments. We don't have a lot of middle management. Our department heads and I juggle, in addition to what we're doing, trying to go after these state and federal grants. And in this past year, we received millions, $1.5 million for the Five Corners to reduce the cost of that project and reduce the betterment costs for property owners. We received over $200,000 from the Green Communities grant program from the Commonwealth. That's a grant program that Easton was one of the first in the state to join back in 2010, where the town receives capital funds to do energy efficient retrofitting and other projects to improve our energy portfolio and reduce our carbon footprint at the same time. So we received over $200,000 towards retrofitting an HVAC system for Frothingham Hall. We've actually been so successful, the public works have been so successful with that grant that the state has told us they're going to limit what we receive in future years because we're in the top 20% in the Commonwealth. We've received over, I believe, a six-figure grant award through the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, which is for climate resiliency. That's another thing the town is working on. The planning department has worked with members of the community on that, and that is a grant for wetland restoration in Easton to improve groundwater absorption. That's on top of our regional grants that we get through SEMRAC, which is the Southeastern Regional Emergency Communication Center. I think I got that right. As we move towards a regional public safety dispatch model, and that body, which is made up of Easton, Norton, Mansfield, and Foxborough, has received multiple millions in grant dollars to advance a construction project for a permanent home for the regional dispatchers, as well as to pay for some of the operating costs. So I'm very proud of it. We're also leaving out the $36 million estimated grant from the MSBA, the School Building Authority, for the new early elementary school project. So I'm, as you could probably tell, very proud of the work that Easton does, looking for grants, because we need them. We do not have a revenue portfolio here that would allow for this level of capital investment absent those grants. So.
Well, that brings me to the budget. So tell me a little bit about how you're working, I know, Connor, on that budget. What sort of obstacles are you facing?
Well, anyone who I think, I don't know if you were at town meeting, but we went into a kind of exhaustive presentation there of the legacy challenges that we have every single year, as well as obviously the severe challenges that we and other municipal governments across the United States are facing due to COVID and the associated recession. So Easton has, since the last recession, had a structural revenue deficit, which is just basically a fancy way of saying that our recurring revenue growth every year is outpaced by the growth of our expenses. And I think there's a kind of natural inclination, particularly when it comes to government. People say, oh, well, that's because they spend so much, just spend less money, problem solved. And it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. And we have spent the better part of the past decade really kicking the tires through audits, both external and our own ongoing annual audits, to look at our staff levels, look at our compensation patterns, look at our pension liabilities, looking at our energy use, and saving hundreds of thousands of dollars of cost a year recurring through things like the LED program, converting our streetlights to LEDs, through maximizing the amount of solar that the town uses. That saves us about $250,000 in energy costs every single year. Conservative wage packages with our unions. And as we've now gone through the process and demonstrated, we have far fewer staff, nearly across the board, than comparable communities. So we have that deficit nonetheless, because in the last recession, the second biggest piece of revenue that comes to Easton and most cities and towns is revenue from the Commonwealth. It's called state aid. And Easton received cuts, over $1 million in cuts to state aid in the last recession in 2008 and 9. And it took until 2016 for us to get that revenue back, not adjusting for inflation. So we lost 8 years of time. And what necessarily happens, no different than with a household budget, is if one source of income takes a big hit, you have to lean harder on the other source of income. And in the case of Easton is property taxes. So our reliance on property taxation has grown every year since then. Again, not because of rich spending. Our budgets go up about 2%, sometimes 3% a year. It's because the second biggest piece of revenue was cut and then didn't start growing again for 8 years. And then when it did start growing again, it was usually at a rate that was below inflation, usually around 1% a year. For context, state aid, one of those programs is called Chapter 70. It's education aid for schools. Easton is what's called a minimum aid district. And so the Easton schools receive the minimum increase in state education funds allowed by law every year. And that's $30 new per kid. So in the case of Easton Public Schools, they get about $100,000 new a year for a district that costs more than $40 million to run. Mm-hmm. the math just doesn't work. No matter how conservative your wages are, no matter how good you are at negotiating energy deals, if that's your growth, which is a quarter of a point, you're not going to keep up. So that's a constant challenge that we've had, and that anyone who's subjected themselves to my budget presentations has probably heard over and over for years. So we always have a challenge there, and we don't just sit around and kind of feel bad about it. We aggressively work on infrastructure. We work on controlling expenses and cutting costs. That has been made even harder by COVID. The budget we adopted for this fiscal year is the most austere in at least a decade and possibly ever. The town and schools eliminated, I think, over 24 jobs going into this fiscal year. And because we have been going through this kind of evaluative process every year, which is our obligation, and we should for you and everyone else who pays taxes here, we go through this process every year of trying to be efficient, trying to reorganize departments, trying to share services. There was no fat to cut when COVID hit. And so we're just cutting into the bone. And so, which is unfortunate because it just results in a lower capability for us to deliver services. So I'm not saying any of that to be apoplectic or to, be a doomsday forecaster, more just to kind of take any opportunity I get to remind people of the kind of historical structural challenges we've always had, and we always work really hard and, in my opinion, do a pretty good job overcoming. But in the case of this budget year, we had an incredibly austere budget due to our anticipated revenue availability, which was another challenge. Is we had no, and there is still no state budget. So that state aid category I just talked about that we rely on, the second biggest part of our income, the Commonwealth still has no budget for the fiscal year, and we're heading into the third month of that fiscal year. So it's been very difficult.
Well, I would think it would be very difficult to plan with such uncertainty.
It is. You do your best with modeling and forecasting, but no one who works in budgeting, whether public or private sector or in your own home, wants to build a annual budget when there's a giant question mark on your income.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the PFAS toxins that were found in some of the town wells. What's the status, Dottie, of that? Do you know what sort of remedial efforts are being made?
Sure. Well, just a little bit of background on what PFAS is. PFAS is a chemical compound that is usually found in communities that have, like out in Fort Devens, there was a high rate of PFAS found in some of the water supplies out there because they do firefighter training. And so PFAS is a chemical that's found in non-stick items. So your non-stick pans, your non-stick clothing, or your water repellent clothing, things like that. And what happens is when water hits those and that goes into your water supply, you end up with those chemical compounds in it. So the federal government had only tested in the past parts per million with an M. And so many of the communities did not have any detectable amounts in that. But recently they've wanted to change to parts per trillion with a T. And when that happened, a lot of communities are seeing that there is some small amounts in their water supply. Easton was very proactive in testing our water supply long before the state or the federal government was really even talking about this. And so when we detected small amounts in a couple of the wells, we started to look for solutions for that, including we just signed on to a class action lawsuit against DuPont and 3M to figure out what the source of some of these issues are. We've done a lot of research on it. We're very on top of it. Many communities, the state was basically advising communities to put some notice on their website. And we went, at Connor's leadership on this, took a much stronger approach on that, by actually talking about this in public meetings, and also offering a rebate to people that wanted to put water filters, PFAS, NSF certified water filters in their homes. And if they submitted the information back to the water department, you get a $75 rebate towards your next water bill, which I did that. The process was very easy. And I haven't heard of any other communities actually offering any kind of assistance to that. So I think that we were ahead of the curve on that. And we have applied for a grant to look at infrastructure, infrastructure protocols as to how to mitigate that. Connor, I think, has some more details on the the aspects of moving forward with how we would treat that in the future.
Sure. So I think Dottie's right that Easton took a really proactive stance on this. An analogy I like to use is you could look at a tabletop and you don't see anything there, but if you use a microscope, you'll see all sorts of stuff crawling around, right? So as regulatory bodies shifted their scale of measurement to this really, really microscopic part per trillion scale, you start finding stuff frequently wherever you look. And under the State Department of Environmental Protection, new regulations that were just adopted this year, most communities the size of Easton don't even need to test. They don't even need to put their finger in the water, so to speak, until this October. So Easton was about a year and a half ahead of that as part of permitting for a well where we did that test on that, as at that time, not regulated scale, right? And we got a couple, I think 3 wells hit over the new limit of 20 parts per trillion. And so we brought the DEP in to a public meeting in November. We talked with the community about what is PFAS, what does it mean, and how do you manage it? And despite the fact that this is a state mandate with no dollars, again, $0 attached to it, we have been working aggressively to get to work with long-term solutions. So in the interim, we have the rebate program for folks who are concerned about it in their homes. And at town meeting in June, we received authorization for about $100,000 in capital funds to advance what's called a PFAS preparedness study. And we're doing that right now. The select board just awarded that contract, I believe, on August 10th. So that is an engineering contract where they will do source identification, they'll do testing, and start to pull together different long-term treatment options for the community, which very well could take the form of treatment plants at some of our wells. These projects are so enormous in scale that you need a $100,000 engineering study just to study how much money you'll need to spend in the future, because you're talking on the multiple millions of dollars. So we are going after grant funding for some of the engineering pieces. And as Dottie said, the board was one of the first, I think, outside of Methuen, one of the first communities in Massachusetts to take the lead and sign on to a class action lawsuit against the manufacturers of PFAS. Because we didn't put it there, right? And it's not the people drink it. It's not certainly not residents of Easton's fault that it's there. These chemicals that are prolific throughout the United States. And so Easton is one of the first communities in Massachusetts to join that class action suit to hopefully provide additional revenue opportunities for us to construct whatever treatment the engineering studies indicate we must.
Sounds wonderful. Yes, I purchased a tube filter, water filter. A.O. Smith is one of the leading brands, and my water is 99.9% pure, which gives me a lot of relief because, we have so many bugs in the air and now in the water that we have to be very conscious and do some self-care in terms of what we put in our mouths and what we breathe. So I'm very pleased to see that the town has taken that initiative with the rebate. So are there any other issues, Dottie, that you, when you look at the future, I know it's kind of hard to do because, Connor, you have outlined so many wonderful paths, and you, Dottie, too, to helping the revenue stream and all of that effort is so well appreciated by the taxpayers. So I know that maybe with COVID and so forth, it's difficult to think ahead, but I'm sure both of you are so resourceful and forward thinking. What do you see on the horizon, Dottie, for things that you'd like to see happen in Easton?
Well, I think our roadmap, because of the infrastructure improvements that we have to stay the course and really look towards continuing with economic development, continuing to be a business-friendly community, and to balance that growth. We need to continue to seek the support of the residents that have been wonderful with supporting these projects. I think that Connor is on a number of statewide policy committees. I serve on the Mass Municipal Regionalization and Policy Committee, the Women Elected Municipal Officials. It's important to see what we do, and it's important to see regionally and statewide what other communities are doing. We can take some of the best ideas and work with them, and we can see some of the mishaps and know how to work around those. So I think it's really important that we do communicate with our neighbors, even regionally in this corridor, with the communities that are around us. Things like Semerac for regionalizing the public safety. I think there's really great opportunities for that, and I think we'll see more of that. One of the things or a couple of things that I do want to put out there is, if people are interested in the budget or any of these issues, you can go onto the town's website and click on Documents on Demand. Across the top, you'll see a notifications icon. Click that, sign in to create an account, and then you can check off anything that you want to get notified of. So any of the boards and committees, I'd recommend, if you're interested in the budgets, to check off the budget subcommittee agendas and minutes. And anytime an agenda is posted for a meeting, you'll get a notification of what the agenda is. So you could do that for any of those boards and committees that interest you, the select board, and then you'll always know what's on the agenda. The budget subcommittee is going to be, I think, much more important in the upcoming years, as they have really strong and robust discussions about the finances and the ideas moving forward. I'd also like to put a shout out for the census. If you haven't already filled out your federal census, it's super important that everyone in your household does that. That's how we get federal money, and it's really important to us to make sure that we're accounting for all our residents. When I checked it last week, I think we were at about 76%. So we're doing better than some communities, but we have a ways to go to get everybody counted. So please go, Google census and just fill out your census online. It's super easy. And also, if you have questions, if you are a small business and you have questions about your business, we put together a business reopening task force. And within a matter of less than a week, I think it was 3 days, we had policies and processes on how businesses could reopen. That was a temporary executive order by the governor, which ends on November 1st. So businesses that have outdoor dining, they're going to need to be looking at what they're going to do in their next iteration for the winter, and how to be creative in keeping their business resilient. We welcome any of the small businesses in our community to reach out to the Planning and Economic Development Department and work on ways that we can strategize together to help each other. There's some really creative things going on out there. A restaurant in Raynham had a fire in their kitchen, the Two Jerks Barbecue. They partnered with the Easton Country Club to bring food on premises. So like businesses working together, there's a lot of ideas that we could probably share and help business with. So we hope to keep those conversations going.
Well, I know the local businesses have been so helpful and generous in that regard, Dottie, and many of us, do takeout so that their business stays viable. One last thing, Connor, I noticed that the ballot box is outside town offices. Mm-hmm. And could you advise our viewers why they should use it?
Sure. So, residents of Massachusetts have three good choices for exercising their right to vote, both for the September 1st primary and for the November 3rd presidential election. Let me pull up the town clerk's website to make sure I don't say anything wrong. The ballot box in front of the town offices is just a separate, secure, safe, and monitored drop box for folks who have requested ballots by mail. So every single registered voter in Massachusetts should have received the white postcard that says, "I want to vote," from the Secretary of the Commonwealth, William Galvin. And folks then can fill that out if they want to vote by mail and send it. It goes to the clerk's office, and then they get a ballot for the election in question. So let's use September 1st. I don't know when this will air, but let's talk about the primary. Depending on when you return that ballot, you may, if you did it weeks ago and stuck it in the mail, good for you. But if you took more time, maybe you weren't sure who you wanted to pick, say it's this week, it's the week before September 1st. If you have that ballot and it's filled out and you don't want to take the chance of it maybe missing a deadline in the mail, we have that ballot drop box for that exact reason. So if somebody wants to be sure that it's getting into the clerk's hands right away, the ballot box is checked multiple times a day. It's under video surveillance. It is secure. And those ballots get checked in to a statewide database that tracks all ballots. And people can follow it. Actually, if they go to, Dottie, do you know the URL off the top of your head?
I don't.
There's a state website where if you do vote by mail, you can keep track of it, sort of like Amazon, checking what the status of your delivery. You can keep track of where your ballot is. I'm sorry, I cannot. If you give me 2 moments, I will find it. I should have had this ready.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to be able to follow your ballot and confirm that it was received and see the process along the way. I've done that and tested it with my own ballots for myself and my family members. And, it's very accurate. So I think it gives people peace of mind, especially some people are concerned that there's going to be a problem with the mail. And, I think it's great that we have that secure option to bring your ballot to town hall, check it by mail. You can come in to vote in person, or you can vote by absentee ballot. So there's a lot of options there.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay.
So I don't have the exact URL, but if people go to our website, go to easton.ma.us, there's a big vote banner at the bottom. Click that. It has every resource you need. The ballot box is as Dottie said, quick, secure way. If you're concerned with postal delays and things like that, you could drop your mail ballot right in there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've already dropped my ballot off with September 1st. I haven't received the other ballot. I'm sure that the federal election will, that ballot will come shortly. So,
correct. To be clear, the presidential ballots will be sent later after the September primary is concluded. So folks should
good
not
to know. Yeah.
And that
all right.
ballot yet in August.
Well, thank you both. Any last comments you want to make? Any parting words?
Well, thank you, Priscilla. I really appreciate, I always love the invitation to come on and speak with you and talk about the great things that are going on. I just want to give a shout out to all of our department heads and Connor specifically. They've just done such an incredible job since February when COVID started. I mean, really, honestly, working around the clock. Connor will probably be giving me a hard time for saying this, but he worked over 100 days straight with no day off. This is really, really serious business, and our department heads and our elected officials take it very seriously. We really have the health and well-being of the whole community on our shoulders, and we want to make sure that we really do the best that we can to do it right. So I just really want to thank everybody for coming together. I want to thank my colleagues on the select board and the school committee and all the other boards and committees that we have, and especially to thank the public for their input, their interest, their enthusiasm, and their support. And I think that, sometimes when these times of great stress happen, you do see so many areas where the community steps up and supports each other. And I see a lot of that. And I just, it makes me happy every time I see a comment on social media that somebody has helped another person. So we're all approaching this from our own lived experience. And if you have a little bit more today, share it with the person next to you that might not, because you might need that hand in the next coming weeks. So that's my words of wisdom for the day.
Thank you. And Connor, how about you?
It's hard to follow, but I'll echo it that I want to thank a couple of different kind of groups. First, the employees of the town have done a remarkable job throughout this, whether it's administrative personnel kind of adjusting and pivoting the way they work and doing remote work or offering remote services or meeting people in parking lots and on sites for inspections, or public works continuing to keep infrastructure moving, and particularly our first responders and police and fire, who obviously, but working from home is not an option. They've been on the front line of this. The chiefs have done an incredible job working with their staff to keep people safe. So I really appreciate the work of all of our department heads, the support of the boards, and the really great work that our first responders and all of our employees have been doing. I also, to Dottie's point, I appreciate and want to say thank you to the residents and the community and the businesses in the community. People have been really patient and kind with each other. And I guess I would just encourage everyone to kind of keep that in the front of their mind, that everyone's having a hard time in different ways, some more than others. These are difficult times, not just for Easton, but for the Commonwealth and the United States. And, everyone's kind of trying to muddle through this the best they can and do the best they can, led hopefully by just trying to keep each other safe and their families safe. So, it's trite at this point to say we're all in this together, but we are all in this together. And so, I just encourage people to keep being their best that they have been, and keep being responsible citizens. Wear your mask when you can't, keep distance from people, and do your best to make good choices for you, your family, and your community. And thank you for everyone's patience.
Yeah, and we thank you too. We applaud both of you for your Herculean efforts on behalf of the citizens of Easton, and also your early efforts to block the spread of the coronavirus. And it's certainly showing that we have one of the fewest amount of cases of any towns of our size. So we thank you. Okay, so enjoy the week. Thanks again for joining. And those of you who are viewing us at home, stay safe. And until next time, be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay, Jason, that was good, huh?